and black folks started revolutions.
In recent years, there's been an emergence of black representation in fantasy. For example, the announcement of Children of Blood and Bone could mark the rise of black-inspired fantasies marketed to Western audiences. But every time a story centered around black characters is released, one question seems to appear. Where are the white people? Now, this question didn't come from nowhere. It is a response to a perceived double standard in Hollywood casting. Race swapping, or inclusion of black or non-white characters in European-inspired fantasies. We've seen this in Game of Thrones, Rings of Power, Harry Potter, The Little Mermaid, and plenty of other European-based film adaptations. On its own, I think the question is valid. However, I think the question ignores context and ignores historical patterns of casting in Hollywood. So I would like to address why black-centered fantasies don't include white characters in prominent roles. This is fun popular. Let's talk about it. Number 1. Where are the Afro fantasies? Black fantasy is still a relatively small category, especially in mainstream film. As a result, there simply aren't very many original black fantasy franchises to adapt. For example, Princess Tiana became the first original black Disney princess in 2009. But to this day, she's still the only original black Disney princess. So if you race swap her, then that's game over. Contrarily, T'Challa isn't the only black superhero in Marvel Comics. There are characters like Luke Cage, Nick Fury, and Blade, a rare black superhero with the film series. However, he's one of the very few black superheroes to headline a billion-dollar blockbuster and anchor an entire franchise. So replacing T'Challa or Blade would have a different impact than replacing one character within a much larger pool of white superheroes, many of whom have headlined multiple standalone films. Number 2, where aren't the white people? White characters aren't absent from non-European stories. In many cases, they've occupied major supporting roles or even the lead. Here's a few examples. Princess and the Frog, once again. Tiana is the protagonist, however, the movie does feature a prominent white character, Charlotte Lottie LaBeouf. Actually, Tiana confirmed that Lottie is a princess and was expected to marry Naveen before Tiana was. Also worth mentioning, the film is adapted from the German fairy tale The Frog Prince. Here's another example. Disney's The Lion King, a movie based on Hamlet. While the movie focuses on talking animals, the story takes place in a fictional African country based on Kenya and Tanzania. Despite this fact, most of the actors in the original Lion King movie were voiced by white actors. Most notably, Matthew Broderick as Simba and Jonathan Taylor Thomas as younger Simba. Even Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, included mostly white leads. One final example, The Mummy. The Mummy films starring Brendan Fraser mostly takes place in Egypt, but the story centers on a white explorer, Rick O'Connell, and his white love interest, Evelyn O'Connell, played by Rachel Weisz. I think it's worthy to note that Evelyn O'Connell was actually half Egyptian and a reincarnation of Nefertiti. Most people don't mind the Rachel Weisz casting for this role, but it is interesting that they didn't consider an Egyptian actress for the role or something adjacent. So again, my point is, white actors have long appeared in films inspired by cultures and histories outside of Europe, sometimes as supporting characters and sometimes as protagonists. Here's a few honorable mentions. The Great Wall, 2016, starring Matt Damon, Ghost in the Shell, starring Scarlett Johansson, and Exodus, Gods and Kings, starring Christian Bale. Number 3, my last point, debut films. One pattern I notice is that fantasy franchises often debut with relatively homogeneous casts, but become more diverse through later adaptations and reinterpretations. For example, Lord of the Rings. The film adaptation of Lord of the Rings first came out in 2001, and the cast was almost exclusively white. Rings of Power released in 2022, and it does feature more of an ethnically diverse cast. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was released in 2001 with a predominantly white cast that largely reflected the books. Years later, the franchise began experimenting with different interpretations, including a black actress portraying the adult Hermione in the stage production Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. There's also a more diverse cast in HBO's upcoming TV series. My point is that stories which are adapted repeatedly often evolve over time. Once audiences have seen the same story for decades, creators sometimes reinterpret characters so each adaptation feels distinct rather than simply repeating what came before. That's why you have Asian Lois Lane, or Afro-Latino Miles Morales, or hundreds of Cinderellas and Snow Whites. If a franchise like Black Panther or Children of Blood and Bone are adapted repeatedly in the coming decades, they may eventually be reimagined in similar ways. Who knows? There could be a white Black Panther or Asian Zelly, but we haven't reached that point yet because Afro fantasy is still relatively new in mainstream Western cinema. Overall, these are the reasons I don't think the question, "Where are the white people?" is a fair question. There simply aren't many mainstream characters in Black fantasy to swap with. White characters haven't historically been absent from non-European stories to begin with, and many fantasy franchises begin with predominantly white casts before becoming more diverse through later adaptations. However, I don't think race swapping is the best solution to improving representation. Instead, Hollywood could invest more in creating original African-inspired fantasies or adopting the many Black fantasies that already exist, like Children of Blood and Bone. If Hollywood continues investing in original Black fantasy, maybe there will be less pressure to simply race swap characters in European-inspired stories. But this is just my unpopular opinion. What's yours? Did you agree with my take? Do you still think white people should appear in Black fantasies? Share your unpopular opinions in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.